All right. Welcome, Julia, to the podcast.
Thank you.
I'm excited to learn from you about the conference that's coming up and to talk about mental health in the church and in church leaders.
Mhm.
Um, I'm a pastor's kid and
Oh,
missionary kid, and so this topic is near and dear to my heart, um, as it is with you. So thank you for coming on.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, as we begin, can you share a little bit about your background and how this all came together?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm actually from the Midwest, and I came out here about 7 years ago, and I just love it out here. I went to school at Western Seminary, and for the last about 5 months, I've had my own private practice. I'm out of Vancouver, and really my heart is behind just really equipping folks around mental health. Thankfully, in the Pacific Northwest, there's less stigmas around mental health than what I was used to growing up. So I'm really thankful for that.
Mm.
But I just really believe that anything around mental health can be really equipping and empowering for folks around just the hard stuff. And as we know from 2020, there's just what I'm calling a ripple effect of just the impact of 2020. And when I say 2020, I'm thinking of all of it. So if you're thinking it, oh, this thing, yeah, that thing too. So just I'm kind of wrapping it into one term there, instead of listing it all out, because each of us experienced 2020 differently. So what I started seeing, I'm also a mental health counselor. I'm licensed in Oregon and Washington. And what I really started seeing was we stopped with clients, we stopped working on what they initially brought in. And what I started seeing was 2020 really stirring up stuff from the past. As I've really dove into, crisis and trauma and big events or situations similar to what we're going through, I've learned, just like in 9/11, just like in Katrina, helping professionals are seeing that it's stirring up things from the past. And I really, and we can talk about this further, but this mental health crisis that articles and researchers are talking about, that's coming in the next 4 to 6 years from the impact of 2020. And so I want to do everything in my power to equip, and prepare and build awareness. And so that's really the heart behind putting on a conference like this.
Mhm. Yeah. So the conference is in June.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, June
yeah.
18th. Mhm.
uh, Yeah. And so what are some of the topics that speakers will cover?
Absolutely, yeah. The conference is called Ministering in an Age of Trauma. So we just know that a lot of ministers are really leading in what we're calling real time. They're not, it's a little bit different where it's like, okay, we might schedule these topics out or this plan is happening, but so many leaders have been having to react and respond in the moment. And even now, 2021, at the time of this recording, the last 3 weeks, there's been changes in mandates and changes in this, and even positive change can cause like more stirring up of feeling activated. And
Yeah.
so leaders are now experiencing like, okay, what do again in this like vice grip of we need to make a decision now. And so we have Byron Keeler, and he's really going to be talking about, I love his title of his topic, It Won't Be Over When It's Over. 2020, it won't be over when it's over.
I
And so
love that.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's really going to talk to you about how the grief process works, how new trauma activates old trauma, how, one of the things that I learned from him with working with him the last couple months is getting toilet paper was a trauma response, right? It's a scarcity
Yeah.
response, right? It's
Scrambling. Yeah.
yes, yeah, and really and not labeling that for everyone, right? I don't mean to be so global, but for many, I do believe it was a trauma response. It was, oh my gosh, scarcity, I need to get this thing. And how many stories we've heard of people who have more than enough TP, but felt like they needed to travel 10, 15 miles to get more.
Mm.
Right. And that's just one example. And so after I learned that, I stopped kind of laughing about the TP because I was like, oh wow, like my heart kind of broke for what that meant for people. And that's just on a small scale, right? We know other things that happened this last year that were just devastating. So that's one thing I even just learned from Byron recently. And he's just a wealth of knowledge. He's actually a trauma specialist. Many therapists may have heard of him, but if you're not in the therapy field, you might not know his name. He's like underground, does a bunch of work kind of thing, and he's a trauma specialist, and so he's going to be talking from just a wealth of knowledge and experience. We also have Dr. Ken Logan. Now, he used to be at Western Seminary, actually, and now he's at George Fox University with their doctorate program, clinical doctorate program. And he's also has just such a background around trauma. He's actually an ordained minister, so he gets to speak. He has this unique, and I think if I'm correct, Byron has a pastoral background as well. So these two speakers really can kind of come alongside what it's like to be a leader in a church kind of capacity, but also know what it's like to sit with people really suffering in a one-on-one. And they're just phenomenal speakers. And his title is Remembering How God Heals and Relational Attachment and Relevant Trauma-Informed Care. So as therapists, we know that attachment is massive, right? The primary bonds we create in life, and how trauma can really affect our attachment, not only with others, but with God, right? If we talk about words like projection and just reenactment, these are kind of therapy words, but really what it means is sometimes we take the experiences in our life and we project them onto God, and it distorts our view of him and our experience of him, and really kind of getting under how trauma impacts that and how it distorts view.
Yeah. I'm um, being trauma informed. I'm starting to interview more guests that specialize in trauma, and you'll see it on social media, whether it's in the church ministry field or education with our students, and so a lot of ministry leaders might kind of hear that term. So this conference sounds like uh, Dr. Logan, he'll kind of explain more about what it means to be trauma informed, and how to serve people. So the conference is for church leaders who um, want to serve their people better
Mhm. Yeah,
in this area.
absolutely. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. So what I'm really, you know, words can have different meanings to different people, right? And so when I say
Mm.
church leader, a leader to me is a person of influence. If you have influence. So this is home group leaders, this is hospitality staff, this is intercessor prayer groups. It's not only those who are at the elder board meeting, right?
Mm.
It's these folks as well, these individuals at these meetings as well. But we want all the leaders. And we aren't just talking about the four walls of a church. We're also talking about outreach, ministry directors, and nonprofits, right? People who consider themselves, another way to say it, consider themselves as people who want to build the kingdom, right? And I have a deep heart for believing that part of building the kingdom is to grow in maturity. And how we grow in maturity is connected to emotional regulation, is connected to helping serve and support people who are hurting, right? We
Mhm.
can't just use platitudes or just kind of bypass things with oh, pray more, right? How many times we've heard that working with individuals who have a history in the church. But if there's this trauma informed lens, this understanding of how the nervous system works, how people respond to things differently, how to come and meet someone, it's not just about being compassionate, but it's like, how are you compassionate, right? There's equipping that can happen so that you can meet people and resource people. It's not just on the burden of the leaders to just I have to now be a counselor, right? That's not what we're saying. But we're saying, hey, did you notice how this and this happened? Maybe this person needs a resource. Maybe this person needs a type of support that you otherwise wouldn't have known if you didn't have a trauma informed lens.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Probably a lot of church leaders have read the book Emotionally Healthy Church and Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and Pete Scazzaro, he's made that phrase, you can't be spiritually mature without being emotionally mature, pretty popular. Um, and so what is one of the key things that hold people back from emotional maturity is the trauma that they've been experiencing, the unhealed trauma. And so Byron's going to talk about grief, and Ken's going to talk about attachment and trauma. What are some of the other guests going to be speaking about?
Yeah, absolutely. We have Pastor Danny Clinton. He's connected to Kesed Church in Vancouver, and I really have enjoyed emailing and working with him. I'm kind of the coordinator behind the scenes on this, and so I've loved getting to know these speakers more. And one thing I really appreciate about Danny was his even in how he's talking to me through email is such like a relief. Like he has this way of being vulnerable yet still being a leader in a way that is trustworthy, right? I think sometimes we picture vulnerability as weakness or we feel that, but his way of being vulnerable is like, whoa, I feel safe. Like I feel like you get this.
Mm.
And so his title is Dragons and Dandelions: Learning to Face Struggles with Vulnerability and Curiosity. And
Mm.
so he's a pastor who he's learning how to lead in this last year, like we've been saying, in real time. And so he's going to really talk about how to be honest as a leader, right? To not be like, oh, I have this all together and we're fine and kind of moving through it. And I don't mean to talk down to anyone who genuinely feels fine. I'm not saying that. But he's really speaking to how 2020 has affected pastors. So this isn't just
Oh yeah.
shepherds over the folks that consider them to be shepherd, but also their own heart, like how this has impacted them and what's been stirred up for them. And oh
Mm.
man, I can't even, this whole year I've just been like, I can't imagine what it's like to be a leader right now, like in any capacity, like in a capacity where you have people who are looking to you regularly, right? Again, I believe a leader is a person of influence. In many ways I am, but in this
Mm.
kind of shepherd way, I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah. It has just been brutal.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, ministry is tough always, anyways. Um, but like I like what you said, like just in real time, trying to lead, trying to comfort and care and support while you are still going through those very same things.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, One of my coaching colleagues said, like, we're trying to help people suffer with their suffering while we're going through that same suffering ourselves. And so I hope pastors and leaders that can attend, that it'll be a place where they can kind of process a little bit
Mhm.
and kind of put words to what they've gone through the last year. um, and yeah, uh, that's neat. Uh, it's hard to balance the like being strong and being vulnerable.
Mhm.
Like being vulnerable takes strength,
Yeah.
uh, but it's been nasty. It's been nasty. And when you said the word real time, I was just thinking of the pastors who were helping their congregations in our area with the fires last year and
Oh,
the evacuations. And so like listeners not from the Pacific Northwest may not realize, like we had some pretty scary wildfires um in our area. My wife teaches a little south of Portland, and that city, Oregon City, they had evacuations in many parts of Oregon. And then we had an ice storm
yeah.
too. So like when you said like it's not over, like the trauma of for some people of not having power for a couple weeks, um and just the stress of it,
Yeah.
right? And I think like for some people, one of the ways they kind of get through hard and traumatic times is to say, well, at least we're not dot dot dot, right? So like
Yes.
who am I to complain? And God is in control, and you know at least we're all together as a family. but it is traumatic,
Yeah.
and it's gonna affect you, somewhere, and, the, um so, yeah, I hope, uh, that folks will learn, like, some tools
Hmm.
to kinda work through what they've been through and also kinda mitigate, like, the effects, the long-lasting effects
Right.
of trauma
It,
in their
and
lives.
this is kind of another vein off of that, is like you said, learn tools. Is at the end of the day during at this conference on June 19th, and it's at the end of the day, we're going to have a Q&A panel. And what I really hope out of that is this is not a bunch of speakers telling leaders how to do their job, right? It's not like we just understand all human suffering and we have these degrees and we're just telling you what you're doing wrong. One of the
Mm,
biggest filters I have is anyone who is speaking has a heart for shepherds as well as a heart for survivors of trauma, right? It's not a condescending tone. That is a really big passion of mine, that we are to build up one another. And one of the things around that is the Q&A panel. I hope people who attend lean into this collaborative approach, where it's like, hey, I have this situation or this is kind of coming up. And in the counseling field, we do this all the time, right? Case conceptual, like we work with other colleagues to be like, hey, this is something, like, what did you do? We kind of, that's normal for us,
yeah, we run it by others to
right?
see, am I missing something? Like,
Exactly.
I'm stuck, I need some help.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so I'm
we
kind
do
of,
that.
yeah, I'm taking what we already do in the counseling field and kind of trying to bring it into this environment of, hey,
Mm,
we need one another to iron sharpen iron here, right? I know that's a Christianese term, but it's really like let's build each other up from each other's experiences. Because I hope if one of the things that we've learned through 2020 is culture matters. Our
mm,
experience and our background matter, right? And so
yeah,
that's one of my heart behind this too, is just a collaborative and
mm,
like, like one of my like secret prayers is that like people will meet each other, right? And there's can be this kind of networking thing
yeah,
of build, like, what if one leader is doing this kind of thing that's been really effective and helpful? How awesome would that be? In between sessions of them sharing that and building and just that kind of network thing.
yeah. Because of telehealth, online counseling, I've had a chance to work with, a pastor in a rural area,
Mm,
um, and, one of the challenges is the isolation.
yeah,
Um, and so I hope, there's enough time for pastors in remote areas to get the time off and or
yeah,
take the time to get to the conference. And so the conference is in person. Can you, like, well, when saw it, I was like, oh man, like, I can't make it that day, but I hope I can get the replay.
yeah.
But I'm not going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things too that I've been hearing a lot. And it was a very intentional, it took me a long time to really decide on in person and to not record. And not only because coming out of COVID and we just don't know if we've learned anything around the COVID part of it. It's like, how do we plan? Like, oh no, if I plan and I get attached to something, am I going to go
Oh,
through more disappointment, more fallout, more of like this loss feeling, ambiguous loss, right? And so I
mm,
kind of had to get little bold there and just say, okay, I'm just going to do it. And and one of the reasons behind that is because the topic and the power of being in person and having those conversations to where there is kind of creating that trauma informed lens. Everything I do with this, I want to be able to model what trauma informed lens means to me. Now, I'm not saying anything negative against someone who would stream something like this. That is, I think, that's within your wheelhouse. It's just with what I was working with and what I am kind of moving with in this, that it was the best choice I could make on that. And especially with the
mhm,
Q&A and yeah, so
yeah. Um, it with the Q&A, without it being recorded or live streamed, uh, it does sound like that would, like, help people feel safer
mm, thank
to
you. Mhm.
ask, like, what they really need to ask and or share what they really need to share.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So dragons and dandelions. What are some of the other workshops?
Yeah, he's such a fun title. Uh, we also have Evie and Kevin Kent. Now they are they're from a church in, I think it was Foursquare and Battleground area, Brush Prairie area. And Evie is going to be talking about her experience as a childhood trauma survivor and what she needed from the church. So
Mm,
from this experiential, like really honest, and that's another reason why I avoided the streaming and the recording was for her to be able to share, and Kevin as well, to just to understand that lens, from someone who didn't experience that level of trauma or abuse, and to just really continue to, again, back to the theme of equipping. The more awareness, the more insight, the more we can have compassion, the more we can meet people where they are, the more we can avoid simplifying things and um, uh, what's the word? Not condescending, but kind of that, like, kind of avoiding anything like that, where we would not repeat things like, having more faith or just pray more kind of thing, right?
mm,
Because, and I keep repeating those because it's what I hear day in and day out in the therapy room,
right.
right? Is these kind of things. So
Yeah. The, it, like two things that folks have with experiencing trauma. Um, it sometimes they experience it in church, so they have
yes,
church hurt. Um, and part of them is still hopeful that they'll find the right church, and then when it doesn't go well, with well-meaning people, but it just doesn't go well, it just is another disappointment, and
yeah,
another rejection, or discouragement. So there's church hurt, but then there's also uh y- y- struggling with acceptance and belonging, and uh or even struggling knowing how to ask for help,
yes,
assertively. And so, like, you go to church and just feel like marginalized and really misunderstood. And so I hope that'll help, like, raise awareness of, like,
mhm,
how do we welcome people into a church home and a church family, um, and really meet their needs, and for the church to be a place of healing.
absolutely. And for questions. I remember from my own
Mm,
experience this last year,
mm,
I had questions, right? And I
mm.
usually do the whole, like, I just do my own thing and dive into reading and kind of and researching on my own. But
Oh
I
yeah, I do that.
I, I stepped out and went to my pastor, and it was one of the first times I really kind of got bold in that way. And what I so appreciated was
Mm,
he didn't have these answers. He didn't have like an answer to everything. Because I'm talking, I had some deep questions about human suffering and big stuff, And what I really appreciate was this, like, like honesty and openness to have a conversation and to really be heard. And I think I didn't know it before, but that's what I needed, right?
mm,
And again, I think that's another trauma informed lens where I'm leery of people who just have answers to human suffering, that have these just like boom, boom, boom kind of answers. The older
mm.
I get, the more I'm like, man, God is big. He is so, so big. And I can't lean on my understanding.
Yeah, yeah. I love that, Julia. You needed to be heard even more than you needed answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, wow. Um, I saw my friend Mark Shelsky
Yes. Let's talk about him.
is part of your speaking team.
Oh,
Um,
I didn't know you knew him.
Oh, Mark was one of teachers, the teachers of our kids. They went to a homeschool co-op uh, at at
Mm,
his uh, at his church, and he was one of the instructors for several different classes.
okay.
I love Mark. His podcast is awesome. His books are good, especially the wisdom of your heart. Um, uh,
Yes. Yep.
uh,
I wanted to mention that too.
yeah. So what will Mark be speaking on? He's got decades of pastoral pastoral experience.
Yep. Yep. I've been hearing a lot about what a genius he is. And so I'm really excited for him to be on the team as well. So his title is Destroyed for the Lack of Knowledge, or Destroyed for Lack of Knowledge, the
Mm,
Desperate Need for a Human Hermeneutic of Emotion. Now, I took one hermeneutic class in Western back in the day, and I'm like, okay, I had to look up the word hermeneutic again because I was like, wait, what's that word mean?
Mm,
And essentially, for those who have that same question as me, it's the lens in which we view the Bible, right? The context, the understanding that we take in reading Scripture. And he really, like you mentioned, his book, Wisdom of the Heart.
yeah, the wisdom of your heart. Yeah.
Yep, he talks a lot into the emotions, and God is a God who has emotions, and and the powerful thing of God's not dysregulated in his emotion, right? Sometimes we have this preconceived notion that to be emotional is to be like out of control or like scary, or
Mm,
which would be understanding if you had a background of that, right? And so
yeah.
again, why trauma informed lens is important. Um, and so I'm really excited to hear him talk a lot about his wisdom from, yeah, like you said, his years of experience and what he can really bring
Mm,
to understanding how scripture speaks to this.
mm. Yeah, for the pastors that might have zoned out on like the psychology based titles, the hermeneutic of emotion, that might have perked them up and got them curious. So yeah, so Mark's a fellow pastor, and just lots of experience leading uh, congregation with and carrying congregation down there in Milwaukee, Oregon.
Mhm.
So yeah. Uh, uh, are there other presenters?
Those are the five. We have the five speakers there. So the two trauma specialists, the two that are what I'm kind of labeling as a trauma informed ministry model, um, with Pastor Danny and Mark, and then Evie with her just wisdom and insight from what it means to be a childhood trauma survivor, and what she needs from the church. So, and
Yeah.
then that Q&A panel. And so we're packing in. We're going to have a on June 19th. And so I'm really excited. I think there's going to be a lot of equipping. I think there's going to be a lot of things to chew on. What I'm also putting together is a lot of resources. If you've heard of His Heart Foundation in the Vancouver area, they do an awesome job. They're a nonprofit organization that does a great job, what they call bridging the gap between mental health and churches.
Oh,
And so we're going to have Director Reverend Angela Howard talk about just all the different resources she provides. They do a lot of school and equipping, like these classes on equipping pastors and leaders in churches around depression, around anxiety, around, I mean, just deep amount of content. And then also they do referrals as well. So resources like that, where it's like, okay, when you're leaving here, it's not just all this knowledge, but it's like, okay, what can I kind of dig into? How can I actually apply some of these things um, in the areas where I lead?
great. Yeah, I'll link to their info in the show notes. And so those are Vancouver resources, or is that available for?
I believe she's building out into Portland area, but I
Oh,
know the kind of center hub is Vancouver.
oh, okay. Yeah. That's great. So we're going to release this episode for here this week for Mental Health Awareness Month, and so I'm glad you're that folks will have a resource after the conference. So the conference, people aren't going to have to make tough choices about which talk they want to go to.
Yeah.
Every attender will be able to hear these five speakers.
I laugh because that's so relatable. I've gone to big conferences and they have breakout sessions, and I'm like, this is so frustrating because I want to go to two of them. So then you have a friend go to one and then have them take notes,
Yeah.
But if you're by yourself, you're like, So yeah, it's all going to be together. And yeah, just back to back. One thing I do want to mention is that, so this is at Heritage Church Northwest. It's in Vancouver, and we can put that information wherever you need. And we have what I'm calling the main room, and then you have option to have areas of social distancing in the main room.
Mm.
And then we have remote, so on campus remote viewing as well. So these are for folks who really want even further space, who we're going to have live feed video, and that's going to be in a separate room, but you're still in the same building.
Okay.
So we did our best to try to provide as some options for people, because we really believe, come as you are, right? There's just, yeah, we're just all navigating this. So I want to try to provide as many options for safety and what people's convictions are.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, um, uh, is there anything else you want to say about the conference and like what are you hoping for?
Again, I'm hoping for a deeper understanding on how hurt and wound and toxic stress affects people and their relationships, and
Mm,
so that people who have a heart to build up their congregation, their small groups, their whoever they're outreaching to will just feel more empowered to have tough conversations, feel more empowered to be able to know how to resource, to be able to know and ask questions that they weren't equipped to before. And then also for themselves, burnout's real right now. So
mm,
to really be able to leave there saying, okay, these other people who have walked really hard places are doing this and it's helpful, or their type of honesty is really helpful. So kind of both, not only internally for themselves, but also their outreach and their ministry and how it'll affect their ministry.
oh,
So
yeah, yeah.
um,
Even though like burnout isn't like its own separate topic, I can hear how several of the topics will address it.
yeah,
And then certainly in the Q&A, um, you know, I hope folks will um, like bring the places that they need support in,
yeah,
and the questions they need
absolutely.
answered. Yeah.
And one thing I do want to add as well is this is, you know, we're counselors, we're mental health professionals, and I fully believe that a mental health professional is a type of shepherd. I believe we are involved in that umbrella of ministry, and so this is also for mental health professionals, right? To get this kind of insight and experience as well. Some of this you could be like, yep, I know that, I know that, I know that, but what if there's treasures that you don't know, right? What if it's actually just a space for you to also kind of sit and be like, how can I take care of my heart well in this season? Or what if it's just you need validation right now,
Mm,
right? It might not be a one on one, but just to be in a space where you have a lot of people who have a similar heart to you, right?
mm.
And
Oh yeah,
that's big.
yeah. The conferences that I've been uh, to, where it is a relief to be with kindred spirits who
Yeah.
are passionate about like the same things. And yeah, the with uh, folks that cannot attend the conference
Mhm.
in other states or countries, um, do you have any resources that come to mind, uh, books um, or podcasts, um, where that you found helpful in the area of like mental health and church life, even or just in emotional health and trauma, like in this last year that's been helpful for you,
Oh,
Julia?
that's a good question. That's like literally the only kind of books I get into. So I'm
Awesome.
trying to think, okay, what are the top ones?
Mm,
Even if you're remote and you're not in this area, like I would definitely point you back to His Heart Foundation. They have a whole academy where they have specialists and they have specialists teach and equip on. I know I did a teaching for them on youth and depression, and so very evidence based and um, expert content.
mhm,
Um, Another one, I'm really in a line right now. So personally or professionally, I'm really studying a lot about sexual abuse.
mm,
And so right now, I'm just reading a ton of books on that because we've really been seeing how, especially the elections, have stirred up past trauma in these ways. So, Rid of My Disgrace, I am really thinking, I really like that book right now. That's on the topic of sexual assault, and that's
mm,
written to sexual assault survivors.
mm,
Rid of My Disgrace.
mm.
Um,
Would that be helpful for folks with like with sexual childhood sexual abuse too?
yeah, yep. Now there's a lot too about more childhood sexual abuse. I literally have 6 more books that I'm in queue, but I don't want to recommend any until I feel more confident about that. But
Mhm.
they're out there. Um, yeah, that's a good question. I kind of might have to circle back to that one because I want to make sure I'm recommending ones that I feel like are I really want to stand behind. Um, So
Yeah.
yeah, I think I really believe we're going to start seeing more articles and more support on this. I really do, because the mental health crisis that's coming and that already is here. You and I, even before this call, were talking about what it's like to have so many referrals coming every single week.
Mm.
And it's one thing to be full, have a full caseload yourself. It's another thing to think of every peer you ever know and they're full. Right, of like, I literally cannot think of any other therapist, who is open right now, or who has a wait list that's less than a month,
Mm.
right? So, like, we're already experiencing this as mental health providers. Um, so I really see more content coming through. So I know Barna Group, they're a research group. I watched a ton of their videos. I recommend going to them. They have a couple, I believe they call it the state of the church. I watched 2 or 3 videos, and I think they're doing a good job equipping churches on how everything from Gen Z is being affected, because they're the ones, it's not millennials anymore, right? It's Gen Z that we're kind of focused on right now, because they're entering adulthood and the
Mm.
impact 2020 has had on them. And they're the least stereotype. They have less stereotypes against mental health than any other generation. So they're talking more. You're hearing more things like trauma and all these diagnosed terms. They're speaking of it a lot more.
Mm.
And so really getting prepared for the future generations, I think, is important too.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. Um, I I like listening to the Carrie Newhoff
Mhm.
podcast, and he does Church Pulse weekly, and he often talks about mental health issues in church leadership.
Yeah,
I found him helpful.
it's good.
Um, yeah. So I'm excited. You're going to be busy the next few weeks getting
Yeah.
ready for this conference, Julia. Yeah. So can we shift gears a little bit to kind of talk a little bit about your practice,
Mhm.
or just like what's next for you?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, thank you. So this, my business, Garrison Counseling Services, is everything mental health. I'm kind of calling it. Where yes, I see one-on-one clients. I have my own private practice where I'm doing individual therapy, but I'd say about over 50% I want to equip. I want to create support groups. I just did a creative journaling workshop that had to deal with processing and how to kind of I use the feelings wheel. Us therapists would be proud. I use the feelings wheel and kind of really understanding how we can do useful work without it doesn't just have to be one-on-one. Obviously I completely believe in one-on-one, but I know
Mm.
not only is it a passion of mine to equip, I know it's essential for what's coming, because there is, like I said, there's a lot of impact from 2020. And so more conferences, more seminars down the road. Yeah, I do want to do some more remote, maybe online courses. So anything that has to do with psychological or mental health education,
Mm.
I'm on board for. So it's like I see a need and then I zero in on it, and then I want to bring as many experts as I can to speak to it.
Yeah. 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 Are you naturally a teacher? Do you like to teach or instruct?
I didn't know it until I had a mentor speak into my life, and then you
Yeah.
look backwards and you're like, oh yeah, that's there. So
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think one of the things that's kind of stood out from our talk today is you're not just talking about treating and supporting and caring for people, although that's you know, uh, but you're wanting to equip people. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, the exhortation, that's a new term, right? It's a verb of action, like the how-to teacher, right? Like I want to break down Christianese, I want to break down concepts, I want to break down everything to be like, how does this look practically? Like what does this mean to
mm,
grow in this way or to heal in this way? And then
mm,
I'm also, if you're familiar with the Strengths Finder, I'm an individualism or listic. Basically, like each individual is unique, right? And so it can get
yes,
overwhelming sometimes when I'm like, everyone's so different. Like, but I think
yes,
that's a beautiful thing to have unique.
yeah.
Mhm.
That's one of my strengths
Yeah.
too, and for me, it plays out in just being curious
Mm.
about just how unique people are. And people just fascinate me. That is one of the fun things about interviewing folks on the podcast is just kind of hearing their story.
Yeah.
And so it's neat. Like, miss you at a New Day Counseling Center, but
Yeah.
like you're doing what you need to be doing. So that's very cool, Julia.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as we kind of wind down our time for today, is there any last uh, thoughts that you want to share with maybe people who are might be thinking about the conference, or just um, anything on what we've touched on today?
Yeah. If I could take two different paths, my first one would be to any listener right now, um, fight for truth, fight for honesty in your life. So any listener, whether you're dealing with grief, whether you're whatever you're dealing with, to really fight for honesty. I think if that's something that I can
Mm,
just encourage any listener, and how that translates in my life is we use the word authenticity and vulnerability a lot, and I use honesty because it has to do with being honest and being truthful about your experiences, your needs. You can take in a lot of different directions. So again, back to the individualist, you're like, everyone's going to hear that differently, but I just, there's something about me that in this season we need to fight for, to be honest in our lives, and
mm,
to show up, just as we are, and that doesn't need to be perfection. It just needs to be real.
mm.
Um, so if, yeah, that could be kind of my like, yeah, encouraging thing there. And then the second thing is around sign up for the conference. I wanted to offer anyone listening to this the promo code Courage25, for yeah, anyone listening to this, that you can get a discount, 25% discount on the conference. And that'll end on June 5th. So you can get 25% off of the 95 early bird price, and sign up. I'm guessing you might be able to put the link for registration connected to this
Oh,
video.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and thanks for offering that discount, Julia. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The oh, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I will. W- are you offering any scholarships for folks to attend?
I'm not. I'm
Okay.
trying to do my best as doing promo codes as much as I can.
Okay.
Yeah, I think with meeting costs and things like that, but I am open to that in the future. Like we talked before, everything's a learning process. So
Uh-huh.
so
Yeah.
bringing that up, I think in the future I can definitely partner with people to provide scholarships.
Yeah. And this is not a one-time thing. Like
Yeah,
this is like,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. The I I I hope it'll go great. It's
Yeah.
like it's so needed, right?
Mhm.
And that's one of the whether it's trauma, getting help and support and treatment for trauma, or getting to a conference, like there's the need, but then there's like just the obstacles
Yeah.
that people just have to fight through and to
Mhm.
overcome to get the help that they need,
Mhm.
you know? And so, um, yeah, um, I just hope for like smooth paths for people
Thank you.
to get the help they need.
That's
Uh,
the name of the website, Make Level Paths. It's about smooth paths.
oh, awesome,
Yep.
awesome, awesome. I didn't even realize that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's so good. Um, thank you, Julia.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, the we'll put all the info, and I hope in the future you can come on and talk a little bit more about like the work that you do with your clients, um, or the other workshops that you might do in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome.